Angie Dickinson has starred in some of the most iconic films and TV shows of the 20th century. She's worked with legends, broken barriers, and carved out a legacy that few actresses of her era could match. But there's one project, one film, that she can't bring herself to revisit, not even once. And it's not some forgotten flop or embarrassing early role. No, it's Rio Bravo, the 1959 Western that catapulted her into stardom and placed her alongside giants like John Wayne and Dean Martin. A film beloved by critics, cherished by fans, and studied by film students for generations. And yet, Angie refuses to watch it. To this day. Why? That's the question that's haunted fans for decades. Why would a woman known for her poise and confidence shy away from the very performance that launched her career? On the surface, it doesn't make sense. But the answer lies beneath the surface, in the emotional shadows most people never see. Because Rio Bravo isn't just a movie to Angie Dickinson. It's a time capsule, a deeply personal, almost sacred relic from a chapter of her life filled with insecurity, private grief, and one relationship that would come to define how she remembered it all. For Angie, that film isn't just about acting, it's about everything she was going through at the time. The fear of not measuring up. The pressure of proving herself next to titans of the screen. And most painfully, the memory of a young man she adored, Ricky Nelson, whose tragic fate still weighs heavily on her heart. Watching Rio Bravo would mean confronting all of that at once. So while the world continues to praise the film as a Western masterpiece, Angie sees something entirely different. A ghost from her past. A moment frozen in time that she's never quite made peace with. And as we'll uncover, that one episode she filmed in 1959 still lingers in the background of her story. Untouched, unwatched, and unforgettable. When Angie Dickinson first walked onto the set of Rio Bravo, she wasn't the legend we know today. She was still climbing, still proving herself in an industry that didn't make it easy for women to be taken seriously. At the time, she was mostly known for playing supporting roles in TV shows and B-movies. Talented, yes. Beautiful, undeniably. But not yet a star. So when she landed the role of Feathers, a sultry, quick-witted gambler opposite John Wayne's hard-edged sheriff, the opportunity felt like a dream, and a test she wasn't sure she could pass. From the outside, Rio Bravo looked like a golden ticket. Directed by the legendary Howard Hawks and stacked with Hollywood heavyweights like Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson, the film had all the ingredients of a blockbuster. But for Angie, it also came with immense pressure. She was stepping into a male-dominated set, surrounded by icons whose careers had already been cemented in stone. And she wasn't just playing a decorative love interest. Feathers had layers. She had to hold her own, deliver sharp dialogue, exude confidence, and somehow not disappear in the shadow of John Wayne. Privately though, Angie didn't feel ready. She later admitted that during filming, she constantly second-guessed herself. She felt raw, unpolished, and outmatched. Every scene felt like a tightrope walk, trying to appear fearless while silently questioning whether she belonged there at all. And even after the film's release, despite the praise, the newfound attention, the sudden bump in stardom, those insecurities lingered. In her eyes, the performance was flawed, embarrassing, even a time capsule of everything she didn't yet know about herself as an actress. That's why she never watched it. Because seeing herself in Rio Bravo would mean staring directly at a version of herself she was still trying to grow out of. A young woman who looked confident on the outside, but on the inside, was still desperately trying to believe she deserved to be there. Among the towering figures Angie Dickinson shared the screen with in Rio Bravo, it was the youngest cast member who left the deepest emotional imprint. Ricky Nelson was just 18 years old when he stepped into the role of Colorado Ryan, a soft-spoken gunslinger with a quiet edge. At the time, Ricky was already a national heartthrob. He'd made a name for himself as a teen idol through both music and his role on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. To millions, he was a poster boy. But to Angie, he was something else entirely. On set, their connection came naturally. Despite the age gap, Angie was in her late 20s, they shared a quiet chemistry rooted in mutual respect. Ricky wasn't loud or flashy like many young stars of the era. He was humble, kind, and disarmingly gentle. The kind of person who didn't need to take up space to be noticed. For Angie, who was struggling to find her footing in a high-pressure environment, Ricky's calm presence was a comfort. They weren't lovers, but their bond ran deep, one of those rare connections that don't need to be labeled to be meaningful. Over the years, Angie would speak about him only sparingly, but always with affection. She described him as a gentle soul, someone who carried his fame with quiet dignity. But that tenderness also made his sudden death decades later even more devastating. In 1985, Ricky Nelson died in a tragic plane crash at just 45 years old. The news sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. For Angie, it was personal. It wasn't just the loss of a former co-star, it was the loss of a memory, frozen in time, that now carried a sharp edge of grief. Watching Rio Bravo would mean seeing Ricky alive again, his youthful face, his effortless charm, his quiet fire. And for Angie, that's simply too much, because some performances don't age like film, they linger in the heart. And for her, seeing Ricky on screen isn't nostalgia. It's pain, real, raw, and still unresolved. For most people, Rio Bravo is a cinematic treasure, a Western classic filled with action, charm, and legendary performances. But for Angie Dickinson, it's something else entirely. It's not just a movie. It's a snapshot of a life she no longer lives, and a version of herself she's tried for decades to outgrow. Whenever people bring it up, and they often do, she nods politely, offers a smile, maybe shares a kind word about the cast. But deep down, there's a wall she never lets anyone past, because that film holds too many memories, and not all of them are good. To outsiders, Rio Bravo marked the beginning of something great. It was Angie's breakout. It proved she could hold her own alongside some of Hollywood's most intimidating figures. But to her, it was a storm of emotions, youthful excitement tangled with deep insecurity. She was still figuring out who she was, not just as an actress, but as a woman navigating a brutally competitive industry that rarely showed kindness. Behind every scene she filmed, there were doubts. Did she deliver that line right? Did she look nervous? Did they regret casting her? And while the experience helped launch her into the spotlight, it also became a painful reminder of everything she struggled with behind closed doors. Rio Bravo became a symbol of her professional birth, but also her emotional vulnerability. Watching it now would mean reliving the pressure, the anxiety, the uncertainty that came with trying to prove herself in a room full of giants. And then there's the silence, the kind that lingers after the cameras stop rolling and the lights fade. When Angie remembers Rio Bravo, it's not just the scenes or the lines that come back to her. It's the feeling of being young, raw, and unprotected in a world that demanded perfection. It's the memory of trying to stay strong while quietly falling apart. And that's why, for her, the film isn't something to celebrate with popcorn and nostalgia. It's something to quietly avoid, a reminder of how much she had to survive just to become the icon the world now sees. For all the glitz and applause that surrounded her career, Angie Dickinson's personal life told a much quieter, more painful story. After Rio Bravo, she rose through the ranks of Hollywood royalty, starring in hits, gracing magazine covers, and becoming a symbol of confidence and charm. But away from the cameras, her world was far more complicated. The woman America saw as glamorous and untouchable was often exhausted, conflicted, and making choices no one ever saw. In 1965, Angie married Burt Bacharach, one of the most celebrated composers of his time. Together, they seemed like the ultimate power couple, beauty and brilliance, fame and music, all wrapped into one golden image. But like so many Hollywood love stories, theirs was not without cracks. They spent years in and out of separations, trying to balance their careers and private lives while raising their only child, a daughter named Nikki. Nikki was born in 1966, and from an early age, she faced challenges that didn't yet have a name in the public eye. Diagnosed later with autism, Nikki struggled with mental health issues that Angie and Burt spent years trying to understand. Back then, there weren't resources or roadmaps. There was just love and confusion. Angie, in particular, became Nikki's fierce protector, stepping back from major roles and turning down career-defining opportunities so she could be there for her daughter. It was a decision that changed everything. Her life no longer revolved around premieres and press tours, it revolved around doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, and late-night breakdowns behind closed doors. And when Nikki tragically took her own life in 2007 at the age of 40, Angie was shattered. The loss didn't just hurt, it rewrote her entirely. She called it the most painful experience of her life. And even years later, that pain still hums beneath her voice whenever she speaks of it. So when people ask why she never went back to watch Rio Bravo, they're asking the wrong question. Because sometimes, it's not about the movie, it's about everything that came after. And for Angie Dickinson, the spotlight may have shone brightly, but it never reached the places that hurt the most. Angie Dickinson has always known how to keep the world at just enough distance. It's part of what made her so magnetic. She could be captivating without ever fully letting you in. Over the years, she gave interviews, walked red carpets, posed for photo spreads, but she never opened the vault, not the real one. And that was no accident. Because behind the poise and wit, there was a woman who had learned the cost of vulnerability in a town that chews it up for breakfast. She never chased headlines. She didn't air dirty laundry or lean into tabloid drama. And when personal tragedy hit, when her marriage unraveled, when her daughter's health declined, when she disappeared from the spotlight for long stretches, Angie didn't explain herself. She didn't owe the world an explanation, and she knew it. But that silence came at a cost. It meant carrying a lifetime of emotional weight behind closed doors, holding it together while everyone else just saw the red lipstick and perfectly pinned hair. That's also why Rio Bravo became more than just a film to avoid. It became a symbol of everything she chose to lock away. Her insecurities as a young actress, her quiet grief for Ricky Nelson, her struggle to believe she belonged. Watching that movie would be like reopening a diary she never meant to share. The smiles, the flirtation, the confident screen presence, it was all a performance. A strong exterior covering a vulnerable soul who hadn't yet figured out how to protect herself. So instead, she built walls. Elegant ones, with charm and intellect and just enough mystery to keep people guessing. It wasn't about hiding the truth, it was about surviving it. Hollywood demands perfection, but Angie knew the truth was messy, painful, unspoken, and that's how she kept her past safe, not by denying it ever happened, but by never giving anyone the power to exploit it. Rio Bravo may have made her famous, but it also holds the pieces of a woman still figuring herself out, and guarding those pieces became its own kind of strength. For decades, Angie Dickinson stayed silent. She smiled when people praised Rio Bravo, nodded politely when asked about Ricky Nelson, and redirected questions that got too close to the truth. That silence wasn't cold, it was calculated. She wasn't hiding shame, she was protecting something fragile. But now, after a lifetime of holding it all in, Angie has finally decided to speak. And what she shared added an entirely new layer to her story. At 93, Angie isn't interested in headlines or attention. She's not chasing legacy, she already has one. But recently, when asked once again about Rio Bravo, she didn't change the subject. Instead, she opened the door. Just a little. She spoke about Ricky, about their friendship, about the unique kind of sadness that settles in your bones when someone you once held close disappears forever. She talked about what it felt like to see his face frozen in time on screen, knowing the young man behind that smile would never grow old. And she admitted, with quiet honesty, that watching the film just hurts too much. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't performative. It was just real. And in that rare moment of openness, Angie reminded everyone that even legends carry grief they never fully unpack. Her words weren't about scandal or romance. They were about memory, emotion, connection. She didn't describe Ricky Nelson as a lost love or a secret heartbreak. She spoke of him the way someone remembers a kindred spirit, someone who mattered in a way that doesn't fade, no matter how many years go by. For fans who've long speculated about what really happened between them, Angie's quiet tribute said more than 1,000 rumors ever could. It wasn't just about Ricky, it was about herself, about how the passage of time brings both clarity and sorrow, and how some stories, even when shared aloud, still feel like whispers from another lifetime. In breaking her silence, Angie didn't just honor Ricky's memory. She let the world see a glimpse of her own humanity, vulnerable, honest, and finally, unburdened. To the world, Rio Bravo is a timeless piece of cinema, a Western classic, a turning point in American film history. But to Angie Dickinson, it's something far more personal, and far more painful. It's not just a role or a credit on her resume. It's a mirror she's never wanted to look into again. Because within that film lives the ghost of her younger self, the anxiety she hid behind perfect delivery, the grief she never let the public see, and the face of a young man who never got the chance to grow old. Her refusal to watch Rio Bravo isn't about regret. It's not about hating the work. It's about memory, and how certain moments, even the ones that made us who we are, can become too heavy to revisit. For Angie, the film represents a collision of beginnings and endings. The start of her fame, the peak of her insecurity, the innocence of Ricky Nelson, and the silent grief that followed his loss. To watch it now would mean reliving all of it at once. And maybe that's why the film holds such power, not just for audiences, but for her. Because Rio Bravo wasn't just a movie. It was a threshold, one she crossed as a young woman desperate to prove herself, and one she's never quite been able to step back through. Angie Dickinson may never press play on that film. And honestly, she doesn't have to. Because some stories don't need to be rewatched to be remembered. They live inside us, in the quiet, unspoken spaces we protect most. And in Angie's case, that one episode she filmed in 1959 will always remain untouched, not out of shame, but out of reverence, for a moment in time that shaped her, haunted her, and, in many ways, made her unforgettable.